Today my group is going to be giving a presentation on communication barriers. We are going to be talking about the causes of communication barriers, the effects of communication barriers, as well as how to avoid them to begin with.
Today, I will be discussing the causes of communication barriers. There are many things that can cause communication barriers, from language all the way to disabilities, and countless other things. The main 5 causes of communication barriers are language, cultural diversity, gender differences, status differences, and physical separation. While we know many forms that have caused barriers, these are the more general topics that the others fall under. In removing communication barriers at work, what workforce diversity means for the hospitality industry, they state that the definition of diversity has moved from racial differences to include an array of variables that represent characteristics that make differences and similarities salient. What this is basically saying is that there are many more topics than the ones that are mostly discussed on a regular basis. These barriers can apply to everyday life and in every situation you can possibly think of, whether it be at home, at school, at a workplace, or just in general walking down the street. One of the main overlooked communication barriers is the communication between patients and doctors. It is one that is very misinterpreted and very misunderstood. In barriers for effective communication around clinical decision making, an analysis of the gaps between doctors and patients' point of view, they state that there are doubts on whether patients feel they have sufficient information for actively participating in clinical decisions. These topics are only a very small portion of what causes communication barriers. Like I said, in everyday life, you run into things that you might not know or you might not understand due to a communication barrier. But the first step in being able to solve communication barriers is realizing that what can cause it. And so there are many things that can cause it, just like things I've stated in the above statement. So next time you're talking, make sure you look out for communication barriers, because when you are able to identify, you are able to help fix the problem. Thank you.
Next, we're going to be talking about the effects of communication barriers. Communication barriers can affect each of the following things. Emotional barriers to communication can affect relationships by making one person shut the other out. When one person is shut out, it creates issues and could lead to more problems in the relationship and eventually could possibly lead to the couple breaking up. An article from Thinking, Skills, and Creativity states that communication barriers affect knowledge sharing and expressive ties, which are important in the early stages of teamwork and partnerships because it helps build the connection between the team. In an organization, lack of communication could potentially lead to failure because without proper communication, the task cannot be properly completed. For example, when planning an event, if everyone isn't properly communicating, there may be problems such as you have too much or too little of something at the event, and therefore the event wouldn't go as smoothly as planned because there was a lack of proper communication. An article from the Journal of Teaching in Travel and Tourism states that the language barrier in study abroad programs can limit student opportunities to interact with the local culture. The entire point of a study abroad program is so that students can gain the experience and learn things from local cultures. However, students are unable to do so because of the language barriers. The last thing that communication barriers can affect is everyday life. It can affect everyday life by making it difficult for some people to talk to people even at a grocery store. For example, if they have a language barrier and don't speak the same language, it would be difficult for those people in everyday life. Or also, it could be just an emotional barrier, and someone talking may come off the wrong way and seem really rude even though they're not trying to be, which could create an entire new communication barrier, which will lead to ineffective communication.
Roadblocks are a lot like communication barriers. They completely halt effective communication between two people. A difference in culture can cause a huge communication barrier between people. In fact, studies have shown the greater the distance, the greater the communication barrier is. The most social interactions you'll have on a daily basis is either with your family members and or your partner. So much as a family member getting married or your partner being promoted can cause communication barriers between you two. Communication barriers affect all social interactions of our lives, but they can be avoided with the right knowledge and with the right mindsets. Cultural communication barriers can be avoided by having general knowledge about how various cultures communicate, or having an open mind when interacting with new cultures, disregarding any stereotypes or generalizations you might have. Interpersonal communication can be avoided by actively listening and responding rather than reacting to what your family member or your partner is saying. Communication barriers can happen in every verbal and nonverbal interaction we have. However, they can be avoided by simply understanding that everybody is culturally different, not placing stereotypes on others, actively listening, not assuming the attention of others, empathizing, and responding to various messages rather than reacting.